What's up guys, Max here, and it's finally happening. E3 is just around the corner. I'm going to be playing a ton of Street Fighter V, but earlier today we saw the new system mechanics trailer for SF5, and it went over a lot of the brand new things we're going to be seeing in this game, as well as the things we're not going to be seeing from previous versions like Street Fighter IV. Namely, the focus attack system has been completely ditched. This makes sense as Street Fighter IV's mechanic was only unique to Street Fighter IV, being the focus attack system and the revenge gauge, and both are completely gone. What I want to do is break down the new things that are now present in Street Fighter V, which is the all-new V-Gauge, taking elements from previous versions of Street Fighter games, and I wouldn't be surprised if later down the line we saw another character with something similar to the focus attack. But let's just get into it. V-skills and the V-Gauge and V-triggers and all this stuff are tied to the V-Gauge bar, which you see above the character's meter. We'll talk about the meter in a little bit too. Essentially what this thing does is regulate how you can use a couple of different moves that each character has that's actually completely unique. It lets you use your V skill, which is a unique ability. For example, Ryu has parries, Chun-Li's able to dive up into the air, Bison's able to throw projectiles back at their opponents that they're thrown at him, as well as Charlie being able to soak a projectile and kind of pocket it and refill his gauge a little bit more. These abilities don't cost anything. In fact, sometimes they really do fill up the bar quite a bit, especially with like Ryu's parry. But they are bound to the characters, so as much as I was excited about seeing parries, they're only bound to Ryu right now, which is fairly interesting. So only Chun-Li can do this launcher thing that throws her up into the air, only Ryu can do parries, and so on and so forth. But since it fills up these bars, what you actually get as a result of it is your unique abilities that use the bar. One bar can be used for something called a V reversal, and this is quite literally if you're holding back and blocking an opponent. While you're stuck in block, hold forward and press all three of your punches, and you'll essentially do what's known as an alpha counter. This was something that was not present in the Street Fighter III series, was not present in the Street Fighter IV series, and only made an appearance, hence its name, in the Street Fighter Alpha games. You used to be charging back to down, and then you would have to press the punches. They made it a lot easier now, and essentially for the cost of one bar of your V-Gauge, you're able to get out of block stun, which is fairly nice. A lot of people will be saving that V-Gauge for what is known as the V-Trigger. Now, V-Triggers are these unique abilities that each character has, and it's kind of a special state. This is the stuff we were talking about a while ago, where we were presuming how each character in Street Fighter V kind of had an instinct mode, and yes, it's almost identical to that, with some characters actually having very identical things to other Killer Instinct characters. Now, that's not especially a bad thing, because it's not an instant win mechanic. It just makes your character a little bit more powerful in this specific mode, but it's not like an X-Factor comeback or something ridiculous like that. If you guys have played Killer Instinct, you would know that instinct can be very important for some of your characters, and I do heavily believe that some characters are going to have really good V-triggers, and some are going to have only okay but other good tools in other regards. For example, right now Ryu's V-trigger seems very freaking good. It's called Denjin Renki, and essentially he charges himself up, and he gets, in this specific mode, all of his normals and EX Hadoukens, as well as his big super, get an electric charge. They travel faster, they do higher damage, and they have higher stun. And you're able to actually hit somebody in stun while they're blocking. So this is going to be very good, and there's going to be quite a few setups for this, because there's a couple other system changes that happen in this game that are taken away from Street Fighter IV, namely backdashing no longer has invincibility, so it's going to be very hard to get away from Ryu in some of these attacks. However, this is a limited amount of time, and it is tied to the timer. Chun-Li's is really interesting because hers, at one point we saw in earlier Street Fighter V videos, duplicated all of her special moves, but it's been adjusted a little bit. Hers is called Renkiko, and she kind of concentrates everything into her hands and feet, and it all hits more than normal. Like, essentially your jumping attacks hit like multiple times. Even your normal attacks will hit more than just once, just giving you a lot more damage. Light attacks don't get these additional benefits, but the mediums and the heavies do. However, there is no extension to special attacks. And like I was saying, when we saw this stuff a lot earlier, it was actually on special attacks, but what was discovered through an on-stage display of a couple of pro players. I believe it was Daigo and Gamerby. These guys found a strategy with Chun-Li where you can kind of throw double Kikokens because it doubled over all her specials, and you can pretty much fill the screen with them, and it became very cheap very fast. That seems to be totally removed now, and it only applies to these jump-in attacks, giving her extra damage on some of the normals, which are the mediums and the heavies. Now, Nash's, or Charlie's, or whatever the heck his name is going to actually be when he comes out here, I think it's going to be Nash. He acquires this thing called the Sonic Move. And in this state, he's able to essentially do kind of DiCaprio-style teleports, where you can teleport behind the opponent on the ground, behind the opponent in the air, or in front of the opponent in the air. However, this is kind of an expensive V-trigger considering, because as soon as you use it, he kind of flies forward and it takes away all your meter, but it sets up for some very interesting mix-ups, and it'll be very hard to block some of this stuff, especially when he uses his V-trigger, which is called the Sonic Move. Now, M. Bison's is essentially a Reflect, which he naturally gets, but when he goes into V-Trigger, he gets this thing called the Psycho Power. And this one's kind of nutty, because he essentially gets the ability to start dashing in certain directions, and his dashes become much faster. Because I don't know if you guys noticed, Bison is super slow right now. His dashes, his back dashes, his walk speed, insanely slow, slower than it's ever been before. And I hate to compare it to Killer Instinct again, but it's very similar to Thunder, his overall walk speed. But what he does is he activates this Psycho Power mode, and he's able to dash forward with invincibility, also very similar to Thunder in Killer Instinct when he does his Instinct. But he also gets crazy different things with his somersault skull diver and like the double knee press and his jumps in the air, and those specials, he actually teleports between them now with a little bit of invincibility. And this one is actually depending on your timer, and it's actually tied to a timer. So it's letting us know which ones are actually a state you're in and which ones are an ability you can use. And I'd say Bison's is actually one of the coolest looking ones in the game. But I think right now, Ryu's V-Scale is actually going to be very good considering the damage boost and being able to like guard crush somebody on the ground. Now, what's kind of crazy about this, like I said, these things being tied to timers. Bison's Psycho Power is a timer. You get it for a limited period of time, as well as Ryu's Denjin mode that's tied to a timer. You get it for a limited period of time. And Chun-Li's Renkiko, also a timer, but like we were earlier saying, Nash is a unique skill that gets used up immediately, and you kind of dash forward and it takes away all your bar for that mix-up. So he doesn't have a timer. You can't do it multiple times, like all zip, zap, whippity-whack around your opponent and then everything like that. Pretty interesting stuff. What I like about this is that it makes every character feel very unique in Street Fighter V. And until I get the chance to mess around with it and play it and see how quickly you can actually build these V skills, of course they'll get adjusted at launch, but we can only take with what we're playing right now, which is going to be at E3. I will be back to let you guys know how this stuff is working. And of course, last but not least, is the critical art bar, which is going on at the bottom of the screen. This thing is essentially your super gauge. You might notice that you don't get different levels of the super gauge similar to Street Fighter 4. It's only 3 this time, so it takes a little bit longer to maybe get some EX meter depending on how big or how fast you can actually build one of these bars. The EX meter is pretty much identical to Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 3, so all of your special attacks can kind of be EX for an additional bonus hit or extra damage. And if you build it up all the way, you get your critical art, which is essentially a super from Street Fighter 4. Another nice tidbit is that this is going to be very similar to Street Fighter 3, where you're able to cancel a special into the super art. So you can actually special cancel into the super art. If you don't know what I mean, you can see Ryu sometimes doing an uppercut, and after the first hit of the uppercut, he does the double fireball motion with the punches, and he goes right into the critical art and combos the entire thing on the ground. Pretty dang cool. And last but not least, the thing I'm most curious about in regards to V-Skill and these gauges and all these different things that they're adding to Street Fighter V is how you can utilize V-Skill in terms of canceling. So, I'm sorry, not V-Skill, your V-Gauge. When you essentially cancel into the V-Trigger, which uses all the bars, your character goes into this state, and you can kind of cancel out of certain specials or normals, it appears, but whether or not this has a limiter on it doesn't mean you can do something like an uppercut into V-Trigger cancel, which puts your character back onto the ground in a neutral state, and you're able to throw like an EX Fireball or a Shinko Hadouken, which would be very similar to Focus Attack Dash Cancel in Street Fighter 4. I don't believe this is the case because a developer at Capcom UK actually immediately got back to me and told me you can't actually uppercut, V-Trigger cancel, and then throw a big Shinko Hadouken. I'm very happy about that because one of the things that bugs me a lot about Street Fighter 4 over the long run was the fact that you can do these big YOLO attacks and cancel them with a couple of bars into a dash forward where you'd be completely safe. I like the fact that uppercuts in every other Street Fighter game outside of Street Fighter 4 are hard commitments, and that hard commitment means that you don't have any way out of it. If you chose to uppercut somebody on your wake up, then you're gonna freaking do it, and you can't stop it. Unlike Street Fighter 4, which the focus attack dash cancel system allowed you to do. It gave you free outs in some situations. So this will be more similar to every other version of Street Fighter. The Alpha series, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3, where you can't stop the uppercut from coming out almost in every single situation. So I'm very happy about that, and it's definitely going to change how people are going to play Street Fighter 5. Thank you guys for tuning in to this lengthy breakdown. I tried to do my best to stick in as much here as possible. Of course, everything here is based off the information that was provided at Capcom, and as soon as I get my hands on it, I'll come back with some more detailed info about how you properly use some of these things and how fun it is when I finally get my hands on it. Thank you dudes very much for watching. I'll be back as soon as possible with some more Street Fighter 5 videos leading up until the time of E3 where I'm able to play it, so don't go anywhere. I'll see you on a video tomorrow. My name is Maximilian, and take care, dudes.